I'm not the victim in this story. I need you to understand that from the very beginning. I'm not here to paint myself as some wounded soul who was pushed too far. I'm here to confess, to tell you exactly what I did, why I did it, and how I systematically dismantled the peace of a family that had welcomed me into their home. I'm here to tell you about the quiet betrayal I orchestrated against my mother in law, Margaret Whitmore, and how I broke something that can never be fully repaired. Some nights I still lie awake wondering if I made the right choice. Other nights I sleep peacefully, knowing that the truth needed to come out no matter who delivered it. The line between justice and cruelty has become blurred for me now. I've crossed it so many times that I am not sure which side I'm standing on anymore. My name is Rachel, and this is my confession. I married Daniel Whitmore 8 years ago in a beautiful ceremony at his family's estate in Connecticut. It was one of those perfect autumn days where the leaves were just starting to turn and the air had that crisp quality that makes everything feel new and promising. I remember standing at the altar, looking into Daniel's eyes, and believing with my whole heart that I was marrying into happiness, into a family that would embrace me, into a life that would be full and complete. I was wrong about so many things. Margaret Whitmore, Daniel's mother, stood in the front row that day with a smile on her face that I now recognize as carefully constructed. She wore a cream-colored dress that was just a shade too close to white, and when she hugged me after the ceremony, she whispered something in my ear that I didn't fully understand at the time. She said, "Welcome to the family, dear. I hope you know what you're getting into." I laughed it off. I thought she was joking. I thought she was being playfully protective of her son, the way mothers often are. I didn't realize until much later that it was a warning, or perhaps a threat dressed up as concern. Daniel was the golden child, the only son in a family that valued legacy above almost everything else. His father, Gerald, had passed away 3 years before I met Daniel, leaving Margaret as the matriarch of the Whitmore family. And she took that role seriously. Too seriously. The Whitmore family wasn't extraordinarily wealthy, but they were comfortable. Gerald had built a successful insurance business over 40 years, and when he died, Margaret inherited everything: the house, the investments, the family name, and most importantly, the control. She held the purse strings and she held them tight. Daniel had two older sisters, Patricia and Helen, both married with children of their own, but neither of them seemed to exist in Margaret's eyes the way Daniel did. He was the heir, the continuation of the Whitmore name, the one who was supposed to carry the family forward, and I was the woman who had attached herself to that legacy. Margaret made it clear from the beginning that she was watching me. She never said it directly, of course. She was too sophisticated for that. But it was in the way she questioned my choices, the way she raised an eyebrow when I talked about my career in marketing, the way she asked with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when Daniel and I were planning to have children. The Whitmore family has always valued tradition, she told me once, about 6 months into my marriage. We were having tea in her sitting room, just the two of us, while Daniel was at work. Gerald and I were married for 37 years. I gave up my teaching career to raise our children. It was a sacrifice, but it was the right sacrifice. Family comes first. I nodded politely and said nothing. But inside, I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. I could hear what she wasn't saying. She was telling me that my career was a problem, that my ambitions were inconvenient, that I needed to fall in line with what the Whitmore family expected of its women. I should have spoken up then. I should have told her that I had no intention of giving up my career, that Daniel and I had discussed this and agreed that we would support each other's goals. But I didn't. I was still trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law, still trying to earn her approval, still trying to belong. Too. That was my first mistake. The years that followed were a slow education in manipulation. Margaret had perfected the art of control without confrontation. She never raised her voice. She never made demands. But she had a way of shaping reality around her that made you question your own perceptions. When Daniel and I bought our first house, Margaret insisted on helping us choose it. She framed it as a generous offer, a way for her to share her experience and wisdom. But somehow, we ended up buying a house that was 15 minutes from her estate, rather than the one we'd loved in the city. She convinced Daniel that the suburbs were better for raising children. children we hadn't even decided to have yet. When I got promoted to senior marketing director at my company, Margaret organized a family dinner to celebrate. But the celebration quickly turned into a discussion about how demanding my new role would be and how difficult it would be to balance work with family responsibilities. By the end of the evening, Daniel was asking me if I was sure I wanted to take on so much stress. I took the promotion anyway, but something had shifted between Daniel and me. He started echoing his mother's concerns, started asking questions that sounded like they came from her mouth rather than his heart. He would come home from visits to her house with new opinions about our life, our choices, our future. And slowly, I realized that I wasn't just married to Daniel, I was married to Margaret's influence. The breaking point came 3 years into our marriage when I had a miscarriage. It was early in the pregnancy, only 7 weeks. We hadn't even told anyone yet. The loss was devastating for me, not just physically, but emotionally. I needed time to grieve. I needed space to process what had happened. I needed Daniel to hold me and tell me that we would get through this together. But Margaret found out. I still don't know how she discovered it. Maybe she saw the pharmacy receipt for the medication I was prescribed. Maybe she overheard a phone conversation. Maybe Daniel told her in a moment of weakness. But she knew. And instead of offering comfort, she offered criticism. "You've been working too hard," she told me, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "All that stress, all that pressure. Your body couldn't handle it. You need to slow down, Rachel. You need to prioritize what really matters." She was blaming me. In her perfectly polished, carefully worded way, she was telling me that my career had killed my baby. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that miscarriages happen for countless reasons, that the doctors had assured me I hadn't done anything wrong. I wanted to throw something at her composed face and watch that serene expression crack. But I didn't. I just nodded and excused myself and cried in the bathroom for an hour. That night, I made a decision. I would never let Margaret Whitmore hurt me again. I would protect myself. I would find a way to break free from her control. I didn't know yet that protection would eventually turn into something darker. That defense would become offense. That the walls I built around myself would eventually become a weapon I would use to tear her world apart. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took years. Years of small observations. Years of keeping my eyes open and my mouth shut. Years of collecting information like someone storing ammunition for a war they know is coming. The first secret I discovered was almost accidental. It was about 4 years into my marriage. Margaret had organized one of her famous family gatherings at the estate. All the Whitmores were there. Patricia with her husband and 3 children, Helen with her husband and 2 daughters, Daniel and me, and, of course, Margaret, presiding over everyone like a queen on her throne. I had excused myself to use the bathroom on the second floor when I passed by Gerald's old study. The door was slightly open, and I could hear Margaret's voice inside. She was on the phone with someone, speaking in a tone I'd never heard from her before. Lower, more urgent, almost pleading. I stopped walking. I pressed myself against the wall, and I listened. "I told you never to call this number," she was saying. "This isn't the time. The family is here. No, I can't send more money right now. You'll have to wait. I've already given you more than I should have. This needs to stop." There was a long pause while the person on the other end spoke. Then Margaret's voice changed again, becoming harder. "Don't threaten me. You know what happens if you push too far. Just wait. I'll take care of it, but you need to be patient." She ended the call abruptly. I heard footsteps approaching the door, and I quickly moved away, slipping into the bathroom before she could see me. I didn't know what I'd overheard, but I knew it was something Margaret wanted to keep hidden. And that knowledge sat in my mind like a seed, waiting for the right conditions to grow. Over the next year, I started paying closer attention. I noticed things I'd overlooked before. The way Margaret would sometimes disappear for hours without explanation. The locked drawer in her bedroom dresser that she never opened in front of anyone. The occasional phone calls she would take in private, emerging afterward with a tightness around her eyes that she quickly masked. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions. I just watched and waited. The second secret came to me through Patricia, Daniel's older sister. Patricia and I had never been close. She was 10 years older than me, and she'd always seemed to resent my presence in the family. But one afternoon, she called me out of the blue and asked if we could meet for coffee. Just the two of us. I was surprised, but I agreed. We met at a cafe in the city, far from the suburbs where the Whitmores lived. Patricia looked different than usual. Tired, anxious. She ordered a glass of wine instead of her usual herbal tea, and I knew something was wrong. "I need to talk to someone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I can't talk to anyone in the family." "But you're not really family, are you, Rachel? You're just married to Daniel." The words stung, but I let them pass. I could see that Patricia was struggling with something bigger than casual cruelty. "What's going on?" I asked. She took a long drink of her wine. Then she set the glass down and looked at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Fear. "Mother has been lying to us," she said, "for years. I found something, documents, in the house. I wasn't supposed to see them, but I did, and I don't know what to do." My heart started beating faster. I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of documents?" Patricia shook her head. "I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But I need to know if I can trust you. If you find out something about Mother, something bad, would you tell Daniel? Would you tell the family?" I considered the question carefully. "It depends on what it is. If it's something that could hurt people, then yes, I think the truth should come out." Patricia's eyes searched my face. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it. "There's money missing," she said finally. "A lot of money. From Father's accounts. From the trust he set up for us children. Mother has been moving it somewhere, and I don't know where. But it's not going to the places she claims it's going." She finished her wine and signaled for another. "I think Mother is hiding something. Or someone. And I think it's been going on for a long time." I left that meeting with my mind racing. Patricia's revelation connected to what I'd overheard on the phone that day at the estate. Someone was receiving money from Margaret. Someone she was trying to keep secret from the family. But who? It took me another 6 months to find out. I'm not proud of how I got the information. I'm not proud of a lot of things I did during this period. But I had become obsessed with uncovering the truth. Partly because I wanted ammunition against Margaret. Partly because I genuinely wanted to know what was happening. And partly because the act of investigating made me feel powerful in a situation where I'd felt powerless for so long. I started by befriending Margaret's housekeeper, Elena. She had worked for the Whitmores for 15 years, and she knew things that no one else did. I invited her for tea whenever I visited the estate. I asked about her family, her health, her life. I made myself someone she could confide in. It took patience, a lot of patience. But eventually, Elena started to trust me. One afternoon, while we were sitting in the kitchen together, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "And Mrs. Whitmore has a sister, you know," she said casually, stirring her tea. "Nobody talks about her. It's like she doesn't exist. But she calls sometimes. And Mrs. Whitmore sends money. A lot of money." "A sister?" I repeated. "Daniel never mentioned an aunt." Elena shrugged. "Like I said, nobody talks about her. I think there was some kind of falling out years ago. But she's out there, living somewhere in California, I think. And Mrs. Whitmore takes care of her." I pressed for more details, but Elena either didn't know them or wasn't willing to share. But she'd given me enough. Margaret Whitmore had a sister she'd hidden from her entire family. A sister she was sending money to. A sister whose existence had been erased from the family narrative. Why? I started digging deeper. I searched through old newspapers online. Marriage records, birth certificates, anything public that might give me information about the Whitmore family's history. It took weeks of searching, but I finally found something. An article from a small California newspaper dated 32 years ago. The headline read, "Local woman convicted in investment fraud case." The woman's name was Janet Whitmore Carter. Margaret's maiden name was Whitmore, and Janet was her younger sister. I read the article with a growing sense of disbelief. Janet had been convicted of running a Ponzi scheme that had defrauded elderly investors of their retirement savings. She'd served 5 years in prison, and according to the article, her family had publicly disowned her during the trial. But Margaret hadn't really disowned her. She'd hidden her, She'd sent money to her in secret for decades, and she'd lied to her husband, her children, and everyone else about her sister's existence. I sat back in my chair and let the implications sink in. Margaret Whitmore, who had spent years judging me, criticizing me, making me feel like I wasn't good enough for her family, had been living a lie this entire time. She'd been protecting a convicted fraudster while preaching about Whitmore family values. She'd been taking money from the family trust to support a woman who had stolen from the vulnerable. And no one knew except me. I had the power to expose her, to bring her down, to watch her carefully constructed world collapse around her. The thought was intoxicating. After years of feeling small and controlled, I finally had something that could shift the balance of power. But I didn't act immediately. I waited. I considered my options. And I started to realize that having information was one thing, but using it effectively was another. I needed to think about timing, about approach, about what I actually wanted to achieve. Did I want to hurt Margaret? Yes, I'm ashamed to admit that. After everything she'd put me through, I wanted her to feel pain. I wanted her to know what it was like to be judged and found wanting. I wanted to take away her control, just as she'd tried to take away mine. But I also knew that exposing Margaret would affect the entire family. Daniel would be hurt. Patricia and Helen would be devastated. The children would be confused. Family relationships that had survived for decades would be tested. And I would be the one responsible for all of it. Was I prepared to carry that weight? I thought about it for months. I went back and forth. Some days I decided to let it go, to bury the secret and move on with my life. Other days the anger would rise up again, and I would pull out my folder of evidence and imagine the moment when I would reveal everything. The decision was ultimately made for me by Margaret herself. It was Christmas Eve, 5 years into my marriage. The whole family had gathered at the estate for their annual celebration. The tree was decorated. The presents were wrapped. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon and roasting meat. Everything looked perfect on the surface. But underneath, things had been getting worse between Margaret and me. She'd become more openly critical in recent months. She made comments about my inability to conceive again after the miscarriage. She questioned my commitment to the marriage. She told Daniel, in my presence, that perhaps he had made a hasty decision in choosing a wife. I absorbed it all. I smiled and nodded and pretended not to notice. But inside, the pressure was building. I could feel something inside me getting ready to snap. The breaking point came during dinner. We were all seated around the long table in the formal dining room. Margaret was at the head, presiding over the meal as always. The conversation was light and pleasant. And then, for reasons I still don't fully understand, Margaret decided to make an announcement. "I have wonderful news," she said, raising her glass. "Daniel and I have been discussing his career, and I've decided to offer him a position at the company as president of operations. It's time for him to take his rightful place in the family business." I froze. Daniel hadn't mentioned anything about this to me, not a single word. I looked at him, and he had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Mother, I thought we agreed to discuss this more before—" "Nonsense," Margaret interrupted. "It's the perfect opportunity, and it will mean more time here, closer to the family. You can commute from the city initially, but eventually you and Rachel should consider moving back to the area. Perhaps the old guest house. We could renovate it." She was planning our lives. Right there at the dinner table in front of everyone, she was making decisions about where we would live and what Daniel would do without any consultation with me, without any consideration for my career, my job, my preferences. I could see Patricia and Helen exchanging glances. They seemed just as surprised as I was. "Margaret," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Daniel and I haven't discussed any of this. Our plans are—" "Your plans can change," Margaret said smoothly. "Family obligations take priority. Surely you understand that by now, Rachel." Something inside me broke. I don't know if it was the years of suppressed anger or the patronizing tone or the way she looked at me like I was an obstacle to be managed rather than a person with my own agency, but I felt a rush of clarity, a moment of absolute certainty. I was done being controlled. I was done being silent. I was done protecting Margaret Whitmore's secrets while she systematically tried to dismantle my life. You're right, Margaret, I said quietly. Family obligations are important. Speaking of which, how is your sister Janet doing these days? The room went completely silent. Margaret's face drained of color. Her hand, which had been reaching for her wine glass, stopped in midair. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice was shaking. Janet Whitmore Carter, I continued, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Your younger sister? The one who served 5 years for investment fraud. The one you've been sending money to for decades. The one you've hidden from your children their entire lives. Patricia gasped. Helen's husband knocked over his water glass. Daniel stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Margaret's composure cracked. For just a moment, I saw something behind her polished exterior. Fear, anger, desperation. You have no right, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You have no right to bring this up. This is a family matter. It is a family matter, I agreed, which is why your family deserves to know the truth. About Janet, about where the money from Gerald's trust has been going, about all the lies you've told to maintain your perfect image. The explosion that followed was unlike anything I'd witnessed before. Margaret stood up from the table so quickly that her chair fell backward. She pointed at me with a trembling finger and called me names I won't repeat. She demanded that I leave her house immediately. She told Daniel that if he stayed with me, she would cut him off from everything. But Daniel didn't move. Instead, he turned to his mother with an expression of hurt confusion. Is it true? He asked. Do you have a sister? Have you been lying to us? Margaret's rage faltered. She looked at her son, her golden child, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been regret. Or maybe it was just fear of losing control. It's complicated, she said. You don't understand the history. Janet made terrible choices. She destroyed her life. I tried to help her, but I couldn't let her mistakes taint this family. I was protecting all of you. By lying? Patricia's voice was cold. By taking money from the trust that Father set up for us? We've been worried about money for years, Mother. Helen couldn't afford to send her daughters to the school she wanted. I had to take out loans for the renovations on our house. And all this time, you were sending our inheritance to a woman you told us didn't exist? The rest of the evening was chaos. Accusations flew. Tears were shed. Margaret tried to justify her actions, claiming that Janet had needed help, that she was family despite her mistakes, that Margaret had been trying to keep her out of trouble for years. But her explanations only raised more questions. How much money had she sent? What was Janet doing now? Was she still involved in anything illegal? By the end of the night, the family was fractured. Patricia and Helen left early, refusing to speak to their mother. Daniel sat in stunned silence, unable to process what he'd learned. And Margaret retreated to her bedroom, her perfect Christmas ruined. I should have felt triumphant. I had done what I'd wanted to do for years. I had exposed her. I had broken her control. I had brought the truth into the light. But all I felt was empty and guilty and afraid of what I had unleashed. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Daniel barely spoke to me. He was too busy dealing with the fallout from my revelation. His relationship with his mother was in ruins. His sisters were demanding a full accounting of the family finances, and he was caught in the middle, trying to hold together a family that was falling apart. He didn't blame me directly, but I could feel the distance growing between us. Every time he looked at me, I saw the question in his eyes. Why did you do it that way? Why did you drop that bomb at Christmas dinner? Why didn't you come to me first? I didn't have good answers. I told myself that I'd been pushed too far, that Margaret had forced my hand with her announcement about Daniel's career. But in my quieter moments, I knew the truth. I had chosen to expose Margaret in the most public, most humiliating way possible because I wanted to hurt her. I wanted everyone to see her fall. I wanted to take away her dignity the way she had tried to take away mine. And that realization sat heavy on my conscience. Over the following months, more information about Janet came to light. It turned out that she had continued to struggle with legal issues even after her release from prison. There had been other schemes, other victims, other arrests. Margaret had been sending money not just to support her sister, but to pay off debts and legal fees and people who had been hurt by Janet's actions. In her own twisted way, Margaret had been trying to do damage control for decades. She'd been cleaning up her sister's messes, trying to prevent the Whitmore name from being dragged through the mud. She'd lied to her family because she was ashamed, because she loved her sister despite everything, because she believed that some truths were too painful to share. I didn't forgive her for the years of manipulation and criticism, but I started to understand her a little better. She wasn't a monster. She was a flawed person who had made terrible choices while trying to protect what she valued most. Just like me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd set out to expose Margaret's hypocrisy, and in doing so, I had revealed my own. I had judged her for her lies while building my own web of secrets. I had criticized her for manipulating the family while orchestrating the most devastating manipulation of all. I had broken family peace in the name of truth, but my motives had been far from pure. I was the villain of this story just as much as she was. The consequences of my betrayal continued to unfold over the following year. Margaret eventually admitted to everything. She provided a full accounting of the money she had sent to Janet over the years. It was a significant sum, but less than Patricia and Helen had feared. The trust was not depleted. There was still enough for everyone, but the damage to relationships couldn't be calculated in dollars. Patricia and Helen slowly rebuilt their connection with their mother, but things were never quite the same. There was a wariness now, a hesitation before trusting. Margaret had lost the unquestioned authority she'd held for so long. Her children saw her as human now, fallible and flawed, and that changed the dynamic of the entire family. Janet herself reached out to the family after the secret was exposed. She wrote letters to Patricia and Helen and Daniel, apologizing for the trouble she'd caused, explaining her struggles with addiction and mental health, asking for a chance to reconnect. Patricia met with her once. Helen refused. Daniel didn't know what to do. And then there was my marriage. Daniel and I had couples therapy, lots of it. We talked about trust and communication and the ways we had failed each other over the years. He admitted that he had let his mother influence him too much. I admitted that I had kept secrets and planned revenge instead of addressing problems directly. We came close to divorce, closer than I ever expected. But somehow we held on. Not because everything was fixed, but because we both realized that we still loved each other beneath all the damage. We wanted to try to rebuild. We wanted to see if there was something worth saving. It took 2 more years before things started to feel stable again. During that time, I did a lot of reflection. I thought about why I'd become the person who could orchestrate such a calculated betrayal. I thought about the moment at Christmas dinner when I had chosen to detonate a bomb rather than defuse it. I thought about the satisfaction I had felt watching Margaret's face crumble, and the shame that followed. I wasn't proud of what I had done, but I also couldn't say I completely regretted it. The truth was, Margaret's secrets had been causing harm for years. The money she diverted from the trust had created financial stress for Patricia and Helen. The lies she told had created a false foundation for the entire family, and the control she exerted over Daniel had nearly destroyed our marriage. If I hadn't exposed her, those patterns would have continued, maybe forever. But the way I did it, the public humiliation, the deliberate timing designed to cause maximum impact, that was cruelty dressed up as justice. That was revenge pretending to be righteousness. I could have done it differently. I could have gone to Daniel first in private. I could have confronted Margaret one-on-one and given her a chance to come clean herself. I could have involved Patricia and Helen in a way that allowed them to process the information before exploding at their mother. Instead, I chose the path that would hurt Margaret most. And in doing so, I hurt everyone else too. The relationship between Margaret and me today is complicated. We're not friends. We'll never be friends. Too much has happened for that. But we've reached a kind of understanding. She knows that I will never again allow her to control my life. And I know that she's not the villain I once imagined her to be. We see each other at family events. We're polite. We can even make small talk without the air crackling with tension. But underneath, there's a mutual awareness. We know each other's capacity for deception. We know each other's weaknesses. We know what we're both capable of when pushed. In a strange way, that knowledge has created a kind of respect between us. Not the warm, loving respect of a healthy family relationship, but something more wary, more honest. Last Christmas, 7 years after the one where everything fell apart, Margaret pulled me aside after dinner. I need to say something to you, she said quietly. I've been thinking about it for a long time. I braced myself for another accusation, another attempt to make me feel guilty. Instead, she said something that surprised me. You were right to expose me. The way you did it was cruel. It caused more pain than necessary, but the truth needed to come out. I had been lying for so long that I'd convinced myself it was acceptable, that it was even noble. But it wasn't. It was cowardice, and fear, and shame. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. I'm not saying I forgive you for the way you did it. I probably never will. But I understand why you did it. And I think, in some strange way, it was what I needed. What we all needed. I didn't know what to say. I stood there in silence, processing her words. I'm sorry, too, I finally managed. For the pain I caused. For choosing revenge over compassion. For making it about hurting you instead of helping the family. Margaret nodded slowly. We both made choices we can't take back. But we're still here. Still trying. That has to count for something. I think about that conversation a lot now. I think about how complicated families are. How the people we're supposed to love most can become the people we hurt most deeply. How the desire to protect ourselves can transform into the desire to destroy others. How the line between victim and perpetrator can blur until it's impossible to tell which side you're standing on. I betrayed my mother-in-law. I exposed her secrets in the most damaging way possible. I broke the peace of a family that had stood for decades. And I did it knowingly, deliberately, with calculation and patience. That makes me responsible for the harm I caused. It makes me accountable for the pain I inflicted. It makes me someone who needs to reckon with her own capacity for cruelty, not just the cruelty of others. But here's what I've learned in the years since. Accountability doesn't mean self-destruction. Acknowledging what you've done wrong doesn't mean you have to torture yourself forever. It means learning, growing, making different choices when similar situations arise. I'm a different person now than I was that Christmas night. I still have a temper. I still have a sharp tongue. I still notice when people are trying to manipulate me, and I still resist it fiercely. But I've learned that resistance doesn't have to mean retaliation, that protecting yourself doesn't require destroying others. Margaret and I will never have a simple relationship, but we've found a way to coexist. And more importantly, Daniel and I have found our way back to each other. Our marriage is stronger now than it was before everything fell apart. Not because the crisis magically fixed us, but because we were forced to look at our patterns honestly and decide to change them. I can't undo what I did. I can't unexpose Margaret's secrets or unbetray her trust, but I can choose how I move forward. I can choose to be someone who uses the truth carefully, not as a weapon. I can choose to confront problems directly instead of building elaborate schemes. I can choose compassion, even when it's hard. That's the work I do now, every day. It doesn't erase the past, but it shapes the future. If you're listening to this and you're in a situation like I was, feeling controlled, feeling small, feeling like you need to fight back, I want to tell you something important. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to demand truth and honesty from the people in your life, but be careful about how you do it. Be careful about letting your pain turn into poison. Be careful about becoming the very thing you're fighting against. I thought I was the hero of my story. I thought I was exposing a villain and fighting for justice. But in the end, I was just another flawed person making flawed choices. Just another person capable of both courage and cruelty. Just another person who had to learn that the truth can heal or it can destroy, depending on how you wield it. Margaret Whitmore was not the woman I thought she was. She was better in some ways and worse in others. She was complicated and contradictory and deeply human. And so am I. That's my confession. That's the truth about what I did and why I did it and how it changed me. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. I'm not sure I'm even asking for it. What I'm asking for is understanding. Recognition that people are rarely entirely good or entirely bad. Recognition that circumstances can push us to do things we never imagined ourselves capable of. Recognition that the path to becoming a better person starts with admitting exactly what kind of person you've been. I betrayed my mother in law. I broke family peace. I caused pain that rippled out further than I ever anticipated. But I also told the truth. I ended a decades long deception. I forced a family to confront uncomfortable realities that they had been avoiding for years. Was it worth it? I still don't know. Some days I think yes. Some days I think no. Most days I think the question is too simple, that reality is too messy for a straightforward answer. What I know for certain is that I'm still here, still trying, still working to become someone I can be proud of. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Face our choices, accept our consequences, and keep moving forward, one day at a time. Janet, Margaret's sister, reached out to me directly about a year ago. I hadn't expected it. We'd never met, and I assumed she blamed me for exposing the family secret that had protected her anonymity for so long. But the email she sent was different than I anticipated. "I know what you did," she wrote. "I know you were the one who told everyone about me. My sister has never quite forgiven you for it. But I want you to know something. You freed both of us. Margaret was carrying the weight of my secrets for decades. It was destroying her, even if she didn't see it. And I was living in the shadows, hidden from my own family, believing I was too shameful to acknowledge. When you brought everything into the light, you gave us both a chance to start over. It was painful. It was messy. But it was necessary. So thank you. Even if you didn't mean it as a gift, that's what it became." I read that email several times. I cried reading it. Not because it absolved me of my choices, but because it reminded me that the consequences of our actions are never simple. What feels like destruction to one person might feel like liberation to another. What seems like justice might also be cruelty. What appears to be the end might actually be a beginning. I met Janet last summer. She flew out to Connecticut at Margaret's invitation. It was the first time in over 30 years that the Whitmore sisters had been in the same room together. Patricia and Helen came too, nervous and curious and unsure how to feel about this aunt they'd only recently learned existed. The reunion was awkward at first. No one knew quite what to say. But gradually the tension eased. Janet told stories about her and Margaret's childhood. Margaret filled in details that Janet had forgotten. They laughed about their parents and cried about their estrangement and slowly, carefully, began to bridge the gap that had separated them for so long. I stayed mostly in the background, watching. It felt strange to be a witness to this reconciliation, knowing that my betrayal had made it possible. I had been the catalyst for so much pain. But now I was seeing something else emerge from that pain, something that looked almost like healing. Daniel came to stand beside me at one point, taking my hand. "This is because of you," he said quietly. "All of this. My mother and her sister, talking for the first time in decades. My aunt starting to understand where they came from. It never would have happened if you hadn't forced the truth out." I squeezed his hand but said nothing. "I'm not saying it was right," he continued. "The way you did it, that was hard. That was painful. But maybe some things need to be broken before they can be fixed properly." I thought about his words for a long time afterward. Maybe he was right. Maybe some structures are so rotten that they can't be renovated. They have to be demolished completely before something new can be built. But that doesn't mean the demolition isn't destructive. It doesn't mean the people inside don't get hurt when the walls come down. It doesn't make the person wielding the hammer a hero. I was both the destroyer and the builder in this story. I tore down a facade that had been standing for decades. And from the rubble, something new eventually emerged. But I can't take full credit for what was built. That was the work of everyone in the family, choosing to pick up the pieces and create something different. All I did was light the match. Whether that makes me brave or reckless, righteous or cruel, I still don't know. Maybe it makes me all of those things at once. Maybe human beings are too complicated to be reduced to single labels. What I know is that I changed the trajectory of an entire family. I disrupted patterns that had been operating for generations. I forced people to see truths they had been hiding from. And I did it imperfectly, messily, with motives that were partly noble and partly selfish. That's my truth. That's my confession. I don't expect everyone to understand. I don't expect everyone to agree with my choices, but I hope that telling this story helps someone else who is struggling with similar questions, someone who feels trapped and is considering drastic action, someone who has information that could change everything and is deciding whether to use it. Here's what I would tell that person. Think carefully about your motivations. Are you acting out of a genuine desire for truth and justice? Or are you acting out of anger and a desire for revenge? Both might lead to the same action, but the energy you bring will shape the outcome. Consider your methods. Is there a way to accomplish your goals that minimizes collateral damage? Can you bring truth into the light without deliberately maximizing pain? Prepare for consequences. Whatever you do will have ripple effects you can't fully predict. People you care about might be hurt. Relationships you value might be damaged. Are you prepared to live with that? And finally, be ready to accept responsibility. If you choose to act, own your choice. Don't pretend you were forced into it. Don't claim you had no other options. Acknowledge that you made a decision, that the decision had consequences, and that you will carry those consequences with you. That's the price of agency. That's the cost of taking action rather than remaining passive. It's a heavy weight to carry, but it's heavier still if you refuse to carry it honestly. I betrayed my mother-in-law and broke family peace. I did it quietly over years through patience and observation and strategic timing. I waited for the perfect moment to strike, and when that moment came, I struck without mercy. I'm not proud of how I did it, but I'm not entirely ashamed either. Because sometimes the people who break things apart are the same people who make it possible for something new to grow. Sometimes destruction and creation are two sides of the same act. Sometimes the person who lights the fire is also the person who helps build from the ashes. I'm still building. Every day I'm still building. That's all any of us can do.